My daughter threw me out of my own house the same afternoon she inherited $33 million. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I didn't even ask her why. I simply smiled and let her think she had won. What she didn't realize was that the story she had just started would end very differently from what she imagined. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end of this story, and if you feel like it, tell me the city you're watching from. I've always wondered how far these stories travel, because what happened between my daughter and me began on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in a house that had once been filled with love. The living room still smelled faintly of my late husband's cologne. It had been nearly 2 years since Harold passed away, but some things in the house never changed. His old leather chair sat by the window where he used to read the newspaper every morning. The oak coffee table we bought during our 25th anniversary still had a small scratch from when our daughter, Emily, had knocked over a toy truck when she was 6. Memories lived in every corner of that house, and for more than 40 years, it had been my home. That afternoon, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, painting soft rectangles across the hardwood floor. The house was unusually quiet after the lawyer left. Even the clock on the wall seemed to tick louder than usual. Tick, tick, tick. Emily stood near the fireplace, holding a folder of legal documents. $33 million. That was the number the lawyer had repeated twice before leaving. The inheritance Harold had carefully built over decades, investments, property shares, and a family trust, had officially transferred to Emily that morning. She had always known something was coming, but hearing the amount spoken out loud changed something in her. I noticed it immediately. Her shoulders straightened, her voice became sharper, and the warmth in her eyes, the one she used to have when she looked at me, vanished like mist under sunlight. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I sat quietly on the sofa, my hands folded in my lap. Emily paced slowly across the room, the folder still clutched in her hand. Then she stopped, right in the center of the living room. The same living room where she used to build pillow forts when she was little. She looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Cold. Calculating. Mom, she said. Her tone was polite, but distant. Yes, sweetheart. I replied. I still called her that without thinking. Old habits from motherhood are hard to erase. She hesitated for a moment. Then she sighed, as if preparing herself for something unpleasant. I think it's time we talk about the house. I tilted my head slightly. The house. Yes. She nodded, glancing around the room. This house. For a moment I assumed she meant maintenance. The place was large, nearly 4,000 square feet, and old homes always required repairs. But the way she said it, something in my chest tightened. Emily walked over to the window and stared outside at the long driveway lined with maple trees. I've been thinking about a lot of things lately, she continued. Her voice had that careful tone people use when they are about to deliver news they know will hurt. You know, the house technically belonged to Dad, she added. I said nothing. She wasn't wrong. Harold had purchased the property long before Emily was born, back when the town was still small and quiet. Over the years we renovated it together, turning it into the home where Emily grew up. But legally speaking, yes, the property had always been in Harold's name. Emily turned back toward me. And now that the inheritance is settled, she said slowly, everything has changed. The silence in the room thickened. I could hear a car passing somewhere down the street. Emily walked closer until she stood directly in front of me. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. I think it would be better if you moved out. Her words hung in the air like smoke. For a brief moment, I wondered if I had misheard her. Moved out. I repeated quietly. She nodded. Yes. No hesitation. No softness. Just certainty. Emily placed the folder of documents on the coffee table and crossed her arms. I'm planning to renovate the house, she continued. Maybe expand it. Turn it into something more modern. Her eyes flicked toward the staircase, the kitchen, the hallway filled with family photographs. And honestly, she added, it would be easier if I had the place to myself. I looked at her for a long time. This was the same girl who once cried for hours when her goldfish died. The same girl who used to run into my arms after school. Now she stood before me like a stranger. Emily, I said softly, this is still my home. She shook her head. No, Mom. Her voice was firm now. It was Dad's house. And now it's part of the inheritance. She gestured toward the folder. And that inheritance belongs to me. There it was. The truth behind the conversation. Not renovation. not convenience. Ownership. I've already talked to a realtor, she continued matter-of-factly. The property alone is worth nearly $4 million now. Once I remodel it, the value will be even higher. I studied her face. Not a trace of doubt. Not a flicker of guilt. Only ambition. And where exactly do you expect me to go? I asked. Emily shrugged lightly. You could find a small apartment somewhere. The way she said it was so casual, as if she were suggesting a restaurant for dinner. There are plenty of senior communities nearby, she added. Places with activities and people your age. People my age. The phrase landed like a stone in my chest. I slowly stood from the sofa. At 70 years old, my movements were not as quick as they once were, but I still carried myself with quiet dignity. Emily watched me carefully, perhaps expecting tears or anger. Instead, I walked toward the hallway, past the photographs, past the staircase, past the memories. I paused near the front door where my coat hung on the wooden rack Harold had built decades ago. Mom, Emily said cautiously behind me. I turned back to face her, and then I smiled. Not a sad smile, not a bitter one, just a calm, quiet smile. All right, I said. Her eyebrows lifted slightly in surprise. You're agreeing? She asked. Yes. The word seemed to confuse her more than resistance would have. I picked up my handbag from the side table. Emily watched me, uncertain now. Good, she said after a moment, trying to regain her confidence. I think this will be better for both of us. Maybe she believed that, or maybe she just wanted to. Either way, I didn't correct her, because as I stepped out of the house that afternoon, with nothing but my purse and the clothes I was wearing, I realized something very important. Emily believed she had just taken everything from me. The house, the inheritance, the power. But sometimes, people celebrate victory far too early. And as the front door closed quietly behind me, I looked back at the house one last time. Then I whispered softly to myself, let her think she won. Because in exactly 3 days, my daughter would be the one knocking on my door. I spent the first night after my daughter threw me out sitting in a quiet diner 20 minutes from the house. The kind of place that never really closes. Fluorescent lights hummed softly above the booths. The coffee tasted burnt, but it was warm, and the waitress kept refilling my cup without asking too many questions. I chose the booth by the window. From there, I could see the empty highway stretching into the dark. Every few minutes, a pair of headlights would pass by, then disappear again. Life moving forward, even when yours suddenly stops. I placed my handbag on the seat beside me and wrapped both hands around the mug of coffee. They were steady. That surprised me. Most people imagine moments like this as dramatic. Tears, anger, a mother begging her child to reconsider. But the truth was much quieter. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. Mostly, I was thinking, because something about the conversation in the living room kept replaying in my mind. The way Emily stood near the fireplace. The way she held those documents like they were a winning lottery ticket. And the way she said the words, "This house belongs to me now." The waitress came by again. You doing all right, honey? She asked gently. Her name tag, said Linda. I gave her a small smile. I will be, I said. She studied my face for a moment, the way people do when they sense a story but know better than to ask. Then she nodded. Well, you just let me know if you need anything. I thanked her and watched as she moved back behind the counter. The diner smelled like pancakes and bacon grease. Strangely comforting. For the first time since leaving the house, I allowed myself to think about where I would sleep that night. Technically, I still had options. My sister lived in Arizona, but I hadn't spoken to her in years. There were a few friends from church, though I hated the idea of showing up on someone's doorstep with a suitcase and a sad story. And then there were the senior communities Emily had suggested. The phrase made me smile again. She said it so politely, like she was recommending a spa resort. I imagined her standing in the living room now, probably calling contractors, already planning what color to paint the walls. Maybe she was measuring the kitchen. Maybe she was posting something on social media. New chapter, new beginnings. That sounded like something Emily would write. She had always loved appearances, even as a little girl. I remembered one afternoon when she was 8 years old. She had insisted on wearing a brand new dress to school picture day, a pale blue one with tiny white flowers. When she came home that afternoon, she ran straight into the kitchen and asked, Mom, did I look pretty enough? Pretty enough. Not happy. Not comfortable. Pretty. Even back then, Emily cared about how things looked, not always about how they felt. I finished my coffee and glanced at the clock above the counter. 10:47 p.m. Outside, the night had grown colder. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. No messages. No missed calls. Emily hadn't tried to contact me. That didn't surprise me either. If anything, she was probably relieved. One less complication. One less responsibility. One more empty bedroom she could turn into something modern. I placed the phone back into my bag and leaned against the booth. That's when Harold's voice came back to me. Not literally, of course. But memories have a way of speaking when the world gets quiet. I remembered sitting at our kitchen table nearly 6 months before he passed away. Harold had been reviewing documents with his attorney. He looked tired that day, but his mind was still sharp. He tapped the folder with his finger and said something I hadn't thought about until now. People change when money shows up. At the time I had laughed. Not Emily, I told him. She's a good girl. Harold didn't argue, but he didn't agree either. Instead, he simply said, "Just promise me one thing." I asked him what that was. He leaned back in his chair and looked directly at me. "Promise me you'll let the system work if it ever needs to." I hadn't understood what he meant. Not fully. The attorney had cleared his throat and continued explaining trust agreements and legal protections, most of which sounded far too complicated for everyday life. I trusted Harold, and Harold trusted his lawyer. So I signed the documents where they told me to sign. Then I went back to making dinner. At the time, it felt like ordinary paperwork. Just another step in preparing for the future. But sitting in that diner booth now, I realized something. Emily thought the inheritance meant she had taken control of everything. The house, the money, the future. What she didn't know was that Harold had never been careless with the future. I glanced down at my phone again. Still no messages. That was all right. Because for the first time that evening, I didn't feel lost anymore. I knew exactly what my next step would be. Tomorrow morning, I was going to visit someone I hadn't seen since Harold's funeral. His attorney. And if my memory was correct, there was one part of the inheritance Emily had never bothered to read carefully. I reached for my coat and stood up from the booth. Linda waved from behind the counter. "Heading out?" "Yes," I said. "Long night ahead." I smiled politely. "Not for me." Then I stepped out into the cold night air. Because somewhere across town, in a quiet office filled with legal paperwork, was the first piece of the truth my daughter hadn't seen yet. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. Old habits from decades of running a household never really disappear. For 40 years, I had been the first person awake in our home, making coffee, opening the curtains, starting the day before anyone else even stirred. Now I woke up in a small roadside motel room just outside town. The room smelled faintly of detergent and old carpet. Nothing fancy, just a narrow bed, a small desk, and a window looking out over the parking lot. A red pickup truck sat under the flickering lamp outside. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling. The events of yesterday felt distant already. Not unreal, just finished. Like the closing of one chapter and the quiet beginning of another. Emily believed she had taken everything from me. But that was only because she had never bothered to understand how her father thought. Harold was a careful man. He had built his business slowly, thoughtfully. Every decision measured. Every risk calculated. Money never changed him. But he always believed money could change other people. I remembered what he told me at the kitchen table months before he passed. Let the system work. At the time, it sounded like lawyer talk. Now it sounded like a warning. I sat up, washed my face in the small bathroom sink, and put on the same clothes I had worn the day before. My suitcase, what little I owned now, sat neatly by the door. At 8:15 that morning, I was already driving toward downtown. The law office sat in an older brick building near the courthouse. Harold had used the same firm for almost 20 years. I had only been there twice. Once when we signed our wills, and once at Harold's funeral. The sign on the door read, Parker and Caldwell. Estate Law. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The office smelled faintly of paper and polished wood. The waiting room was quiet except for the soft ticking of a wall clock. A young receptionist looked up from her computer. "Good morning," she said with a polite smile. "Do you have an appointment?" "My name is Margaret Whitmore," I replied. Her fingers paused above the keyboard. "Oh," she said, her tone changing immediately. "Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Caldwell asked that you be brought in whenever you arrived." She stood quickly and gestured down the hallway. "Right this way." That didn't surprise me. Harold believed in preparation. If he suspected anything might happen after his passing, he would have made sure someone was ready. The hallway was lined with framed legal certificates and photographs of past partners. At the end of it sat a large office with tall windows. Inside, a man in his early 60s stood up from behind a wooden desk. "Margaret," he said warmly. Daniel Caldwell had been Harold's attorney for nearly 15 years. Tall, silver-haired, with the calm demeanor of someone who had spent his entire career dealing with complicated family matters. He walked around the desk and shook my hand gently. "I'm glad you came." His tone suggested he had expected this. "Did Harold ask you to say that?" I asked. Daniel smiled slightly. "No," he said, "but he did ask me to keep an eye on things." He gestured toward a chair. "Please sit." I lowered myself into the leather chair across from his desk. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Daniel studied my face carefully. "You left the house yesterday," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. "No drama," I replied. "No police. No scene. Just the way Harold predicted," Daniel murmured. That caught my attention. "He predicted this?" I asked. Daniel opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a thin folder. "Not exactly," he said, "but he prepared for several possibilities." He placed the folder on the desk between us. Inside were documents I vaguely recognized. Trust agreements. Inheritance structures. Legal language most people would skim without reading. Daniel folded his hands together. "Your daughter received control of the Whitmore family trust yesterday," he said. "I'm aware. $33 million in assets," he continued. "Real estate holdings, long-term investments, and the house." I nodded. "That's what the lawyer told her." Daniel tilted his head slightly. "Yes," he said. "That's what she heard." Something in his tone made me lean forward. "What does that mean?" I asked. Daniel tapped the folder gently with one finger. "It means your daughter focused on the number," he said. "Most people do." He opened the folder and turned it so I could see the pages. "There are several clauses within the trust agreement," he explained. "Conditions that must be maintained in order for the inheritance to remain active." I stared down at the document. Lines of legal text filled the page. "Conditions?" I asked. "Yes." Daniel pointed to a paragraph near the middle of the page. "This one, in particular." I leaned closer and read the heading slowly. "Family care clause." The words stirred something faint in my memory. Daniel spoke gently. "Harold insisted on including it." "What does it say?" I asked. Daniel looked at me carefully before answering. "It states that the primary beneficiary of the trust must maintain reasonable care and housing for the surviving spouse." I blinked. "You," he said simply. The room grew very quiet. Daniel continued. "If the beneficiary fails to meet that condition," he paused briefly, "the trust enters immediate review." "And what happens then?" I asked. Daniel closed the folder slowly. "Then the funds are frozen." I sat back in the chair. $33 million. Frozen. Daniel studied my reaction. "You didn't know?" he said. I shook my head slowly. "No," I replied. Then I thought about Emily standing in the living room. Her confidence. Her certainty. Her voice when she told me. The house belonged to her now. A small smile returned to my face. Daniel noticed. "Margaret," he said carefully, "if your daughter removed you from the home." "She did," I replied. He nodded once. Then he said the sentence that would change everything. "In that case, the trust review process has already begun." And somewhere across town my daughter still believed she had won. Daniel Caldwell closed the folder and rested his hands on top of it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside his office window, the morning traffic had begun to move through downtown. Cars passed slowly along the courthouse square, people heading to work, coffee cups in their hands, living ordinary lives. Inside that quiet office, however, something important had just shifted. $33 million. Frozen. And my daughter didn't even know it yet. I looked down at the folder again. "Harold wrote this clause himself?" I asked. Daniel nodded. "He insisted on it," he said. "We actually discussed it more than once." That didn't surprise me. My husband had always been careful with the things that mattered. Not paranoid, just thoughtful. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair. "You have to understand something about Harold," he continued. "He wasn't worried about money disappearing." "What was he worried about?" I asked. "People changing once they had it." I let out a small breath. That sounded exactly like Harold. He had grown up during harder times than most people remember now. His father worked at a machine shop. His mother cleaned houses for neighbors. Nothing in his life had ever been handed to him. When Harold started his business in his late 20s, He used a second mortgage on our first home to fund it. I still remember the sleepless nights during those early years. The risk, the uncertainty. But Harold believed something deeply. He believed money should protect family, not destroy it. I thought about Emily again, her standing in the living room, her arms crossed, her voice calm as she told me to move out. Daniel must have seen the expression on my face. She didn't read the documents carefully, did she? He asked. No, I said quietly. Daniel sighed. Most beneficiaries don't. He turned the folder back toward himself and flipped through a few pages. Harold structured the trust with a series of safeguards, he explained. Not just the family care clause. Safeguards against. What? I asked. Daniel paused before answering. Greed, he said simply. That word hung in the air for a moment. Then Daniel slid a single page across the desk toward me. This is the section most people skip, he said. I glanced down. Legal language filled the page, but Daniel pointed to one specific paragraph. This clause activates if the beneficiary removes the surviving spouse from the family residence or fails to provide reasonable support. I read the sentence twice. The meaning was clear enough. Emily hadn't just hurt me emotionally. She had violated the conditions of the trust. What happens next? I asked. Daniel folded his hands together. The bank overseeing the trust initiates a review, he said. How long does that take? Sometimes a few days. My mind did the math automatically. Yesterday, the lawyer reading the will. Emily telling me to pack my things. Daniel watched me carefully. You haven't contacted her? He asked. No, and she hasn't contacted you? I shook my head. Daniel leaned back in his chair and gave a quiet nod. That's consistent, he said. With what? With how these situations usually unfold. I raised an eyebrow. You see this often? Daniel let out a soft chuckle. More often than you'd think. He looked toward the window briefly before continuing. When large inheritances are involved, families sometimes show sides of themselves they didn't even know existed. That sentence felt painfully accurate. I remembered Emily as a teenager. She used to sit at the kitchen counter while I cooked dinner, talking endlessly about school and friends. Back then she never talked about money. She talked about dreams, travel, art school, opening a small studio one day. Somewhere along the way, those dreams had changed. Or maybe the world had changed her. Daniel stood up and walked over to a small cabinet behind his desk. He poured 2 glasses of water and handed one to me. Thank you, I said. He returned to his chair. There's something else you should understand, he continued. The trust isn't just a bank account. I took a sip of water. What do you mean? The assets are held under legal management, Daniel explained. Your daughter technically controls them, but she doesn't have unrestricted access. So she can't just withdraw the money? Not the majority of it. Daniel smiled faintly. Harold designed it that way. That sounded exactly like my husband. Careful, strategic, protective. Daniel tapped the folder again. If the review confirms that the family care clause was violated, the trust enters what's called a suspension period. And during that time, I asked, all major transactions are blocked. I set the glass of water down slowly. Blocked. That meant no large withdrawals. No property sales. No sudden spending sprees. Emily probably didn't realize any of that yet. Daniel checked his watch. If the timeline works the way I expect, he said calmly, the bank will notify your daughter very soon. How soon? He gave a small shrug. Possibly today. I imagined Emily waking up in the house that morning, walking through the kitchen, looking around at the place she believed she now owned completely. Maybe she was already planning renovations. Maybe she had started browsing luxury cars online. The thought almost made me laugh. Daniel studied me again. You're handling this remarkably well, he said. I've had a long time to understand people, I replied. He nodded. That's exactly what Harold said about you. I stood up slowly. Daniel followed my movement. So what happens now? He asked. I picked up my purse. Now, I said calmly, we wait. Because somewhere across town, my daughter was about to discover that inheriting $33 million didn't mean she actually had it. I left Daniel Caldwell's office a little after 10 that morning. Downtown was busier now. People hurried along the sidewalks with coffee cups in their hands. Construction crews worked on the corner across from the courthouse, and somewhere nearby a car horn echoed through the street. Life moved quickly out there. Inside my world, however, everything had slowed down. Daniel had offered to call a car for me, but I declined. I needed the quiet walk to clear my thoughts. The air was cool, and the sky had that pale blue color that comes with early autumn mornings. I walked 2 blocks to a small cafe near the courthouse and ordered a cup of tea. Not coffee this time. Coffee would have made my heart race. Tea felt more appropriate for waiting, because that was all there was to do now. Wait. I sat by the window and watched people passing by outside. A young couple pushed a stroller across the street. A man in a suit checked his watch while talking into his phone. Ordinary lives. Ordinary mornings. But somewhere across town, my daughter was waking up in a house she believed was completely hers. I imagined the scene. Emily, standing in the kitchen, opening the refrigerator, walking through the living room where we had argued the day before. Maybe she had already started making plans. Emily was never the type to sit still for long. She probably spent the morning scrolling through renovation ideas online. Modern kitchens, marble countertops, those sleek glass staircases she always liked in magazines. Perhaps she was calling contractors. Perhaps she was texting friends. Big changes coming. I could almost hear her voice. The waitress placed the teacup on the table in front of me. "Here you go," she said with a friendly smile. "Thank you." The steam curled upward from the cup. I wrapped my hands around it and glanced down at my phone. Still nothing. No messages. No missed calls. But I knew that wouldn't last forever. Across town, Daniel Caldwell was back at his desk, and somewhere inside a bank office, someone had already begun reviewing the trust documents. The process had started the moment Emily told me to leave the house. Daniel had explained it clearly. The bank monitored large trusts like Harold's very carefully. When certain conditions were triggered, the system flagged them automatically. Emily probably hadn't even noticed. Yesterday, she had been too busy celebrating, too busy enjoying the feeling of power. I took a slow sip of tea and leaned back in my chair. Harold would have found this moment fascinating. He always believed patience revealed people's true character. When Emily was younger, she hated waiting. If dinner took too long, she complained. If traffic slowed down our car, she sighed loudly in the back seat. Even as an adult, she had little patience for anything that didn't happen immediately. And that was exactly why Harold built the trust the way he did. Time had a way of exposing mistakes. I glanced at the clock on the cafe wall. 10:58 a.m. Then my phone vibrated. Once. Softly against the table. For a moment, I didn't move. I simply looked at the screen. Emily. Her name flashed across the display. The first call. I let it ring. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I wanted to hear the silence between the rings. Because yesterday, when I walked out of the house, she hadn't called me back. She hadn't asked where I was going. She hadn't asked if I was all right. The phone stopped ringing. A second later, it vibrated again. Another call. Emily. This time I answered. Hello. There was a pause on the other end. Not the confident pause of someone in control. A nervous one. Mom. Emily's voice said. Yes. Her breathing sounded slightly uneven. For a moment she didn't speak again. Then she said something I hadn't expected to hear so quickly. Did you talk to Dad's lawyer today? I stared out the window. Across the street, the couple with the stroller had disappeared. Traffic continued to flow past the courthouse. Yes, I said calmly. Another silence. Longer this time. Then Emily spoke again, her voice sharper now. Something weird just happened with the bank. I said nothing. She continued. They froze one of the trust accounts. I let that sentence sit between us. They said it's under review, she added quickly. Some kind of compliance thing. Her voice tried to sound casual, but there was tension underneath. The first crack. I took another sip of tea. What exactly did they say? I asked. They said there's a clause being reviewed, Emily replied. Her voice was beginning to change now. The confidence from yesterday was gone. What kind of clause? I asked gently. I don't know, she said quickly. Some legal nonsense. Legal nonsense. That phrase made me smile slightly. Mom, Emily said after a moment, her tone suddenly cautious. Yes. You didn't file any complaint or something, did you? I looked down at the teacup in my hands. The steam had almost disappeared. No, I said. That was the truth. I hadn't filed anything. The system had simply started doing exactly what Harold designed it to do. Emily let out a breath of relief on the phone. Oh good, she said. Because the bank mentioned something about the house, and she stopped mid-sentence. Something in her voice had shifted again. Realization. Slow. Uncomfortable. Mom, she said carefully. Yes. When you left yesterday, another pause. Then the question finally came. Where did you go? I looked out the cafe window again. The city kept moving. Cars passing. People walking. Life continuing. I found somewhere quiet. I said. Emily didn't respond right away. And in that silence, I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind. Because for the first time, since inheriting $33 million, my daughter was starting to realize that throwing me out of the house might have been the most expensive mistake of her life. For a few seconds after Emily asked where I had gone, neither of us spoke. The cafe around me continued its quiet rhythm. Cups clinked softly against saucers. Someone near the counter laughed at something a friend had said. Ordinary sounds. But on the other end of the phone, my daughter's breathing had changed. Yesterday, she sounded confident. Today she sounded uncertain. I found somewhere quiet, I repeated. Emily didn't answer immediately. I could almost picture her standing in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, eyes moving around the house as if seeing it differently for the first time. The house. The one she said belonged to her now. Well, she said finally, clearing her throat. That's good. Her voice was trying to recover its old confidence. I mean, the bank thing is probably nothing, she continued quickly. Just paperwork. Maybe, I said. Another pause followed. Then Emily spoke again. They mentioned something about a clause in Dad's trust, she said. Something about housing conditions or family obligations. She said the words carefully, like someone reading unfamiliar instructions. Did you know anything about that? She asked. I looked down at the table. The tea in my cup had cooled. I remember your father talking about it once, I said. Talking about what exactly? Emily asked. The trust. She exhaled sharply. Well, the bank said they're reviewing it because of a reported change in living arrangements. Her tone now carried a hint of frustration. I told them nothing changed, she added quickly. I didn't respond. That silence made her continue talking. I mean, technically the house is mine now, she said. So if you decided to leave, that's your choice. Her words came faster now, as if she were trying to convince herself. I didn't force you. I leaned back slightly in the chair. Across the cafe, the waitress wiped down a table. Outside the window, the morning traffic had grown thicker. Emily, I said gently. Yes. Yesterday you told me to pack my things. She didn't respond. You also said the house belonged to you now. Another pause. Then she spoke again, but this time her voice was softer. I didn't mean it like that. I almost smiled. People often rewrite. Yesterday once today becomes uncomfortable. Well, I said calmly. The bank might interpret it differently. That sentence landed quietly. On the other end of the line, Emily went completely silent. For several seconds, I heard nothing but the faint background noise of her house. Then she said something I hadn't heard in her voice for a long time. Uncertainty. Mom, what exactly did Dad put in that trust? I glanced at the window again. The sky had turned brighter now, sunlight reflecting off the courthouse windows across the street. Your father was a careful man, I said. I know that, she replied quickly. He believed money should protect family. Emily didn't answer. So he wrote the trust to make sure that happened. I continued. What does that mean? She asked. Her voice was tighter now. It means the inheritance has responsibilities attached to it. Emily let out a small laugh. That's ridiculous, she said. It's still my inheritance. Is it? I asked softly. That question hung between us. Emily didn't answer immediately. When she spoke again, her voice carried a different tone. Not anger. Not confidence. Concern. The bank said something about freezing accounts if certain conditions are violated, she said. I could hear papers rustling on her side of the phone. They also mentioned the house specifically. Another pause. Then she asked the question she had been avoiding since the conversation began. Mom, where are you staying right now? The concern in her voice sounded almost genuine. But concern and consequences often arrive together. I told you, I replied calmly. Somewhere quiet. That's not really an answer. It's the only one you need right now. Emily sighed. Look, the bank probably just misunderstood something, she said. Once they realize everything's fine, they'll unlock the accounts. Maybe, I said again. But she didn't sound convinced anymore. Mom, she said slowly. If this has anything to do with you leaving yesterday, I didn't interrupt her. Then maybe we should talk about fixing it. Fixing it. The words were interesting. Yesterday, she told me to leave. Today she wanted to fix something. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 11:21 a.m. Right about the time Daniel Caldwell predicted the bank would finish its first review. Emily, I said quietly. Yes. You should probably read the trust documents carefully. I've read them. Have you? Another silence followed. This one was longer. Then, She spoke again. I'm going to call the lawyer, she said. That's a good idea. Dad's lawyer, she added. Yes. I finished the last sip of my tea. And Emily? Yes. You might want to ask him about the family care clause. She didn't answer, but I heard the sound of her breathing change again. Because at that exact moment, my daughter was starting to understand that the problem with inheriting $33 million was that the person who wrote the rules had loved his wife very much. After I mentioned the family care clause, Emily didn't say another word. The line stayed open for a moment. Then she ended the call. No goodbye, just silence. I placed my phone back on the table and sat there for a while, watching the last of the tea swirl in the bottom of the cup. Outside the cafe window, the town had fully woken up now. The courthouse steps were busy, and a group of college students crossed the street laughing about something. The world moved normally. But somewhere across town, my daughter had just started reading documents she should have read yesterday. And that rarely ends well. I paid the bill, thanked the waitress, and stepped outside. The cool air felt good. I walked slowly down the sidewalk toward a small public park a few blocks away. It was a place Harold and I used to visit on quiet Sunday mornings. Same old benches, same fountain, same maple trees. I sat down on a bench near the water and let the sun warm my hands. Time passed quietly. 10 minutes, maybe 15. Then my phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't Emily. The screen showed a different name. Daniel Caldwell. I answered. Hello, Daniel. Margaret, he said. His voice carried that calm professionalism he always used. I just got off the phone with your daughter. That didn't surprise me. How did that conversation go? I asked. Daniel let out a slow breath. She sounded surprised. I smiled slightly. That's one way to describe it. She asked a lot of questions about the trust, he continued. Mostly the parts she skipped yesterday. And Daniel paused. I explained the clause. The fountain splashed quietly in front of me. And how did she react? I asked. At first she insisted there must be a misunderstanding. That sounded exactly like Emily. Daniel continued. She told me you left voluntarily. I looked up at the sky. Clouds moved slowly above the courthouse tower. And what did you tell her? I asked. I told her the bank doesn't evaluate emotions, he replied. It evaluates actions. That sentence felt very Harold. She asked whether the accounts were actually frozen, Daniel added. And I confirmed that the trust has entered review. I nodded to myself. Exactly as Harold designed. Daniel continued speaking. She seemed particularly concerned when I mentioned the suspension period. How long is that again? I asked. Until the violation is resolved, he said. In other words, indefinitely. And what does she need to do to resolve it? I asked. Daniel didn't hesitate. The trust requires that the surviving spouse be provided reasonable housing and care. In simpler terms, me. Without that condition, $33 million might as well have been locked in a vault. Daniel cleared his throat. She asked if there was a way to fix it quickly. I almost laughed. Emily had always liked quick solutions. What did you tell her? I asked. I told her the trust has only one path back to active status. And that is? Daniel answered carefully. The surviving spouse must confirm that proper housing and care are being provided. I leaned back against the bench, meaning the system needed one thing. My word. Daniel continued. She asked where you were staying. I assume you didn't tell her. Of course not. I smiled. Daniel understood discretion. Margaret, he said after a moment. Yes. She sounded worried. The word lingered. Worried. Yesterday, she had been confident. Today she was worried. Money can do that. What do you want to do? Daniel asked. It was a simple question. But the answer mattered. Because the moment I spoke, the next chapter would begin. I looked at the fountain again. Water flowed calmly over the stone edges, the same way it had for decades. Harold and I once sat here feeding breadcrumbs to pigeons when Emily was 5 years old. She laughed when the birds chased each other across the grass. Back then, her biggest problem was deciding which ice cream flavor she wanted. Life felt simple then. Now things were different. Daniel, I said calmly. Yes. Do nothing. A pause followed. You're sure? He asked. Yes. The truth was simple. Emily needed time to understand what had happened. Real understanding doesn't arrive in the first 5 minutes, or even the first hour. It arrives slowly, usually after people realize their power isn't real. Daniel spoke again. Very well, he said. I'll let the review continue. Thank you. One more thing, he added. Yes. She said she might come looking for you. That possibility had crossed my mind already. Emily had always been persistent when something important was at stake. Let her, I said quietly. Daniel chuckled softly. Your husband would appreciate that strategy. I learned it from him. We ended the call. I placed the phone in my purse and sat there on the bench for a long moment, listening to the sound of the fountain. Somewhere across town, Emily was probably pacing the living room, reading legal documents, calling the bank again, trying to understand how $33 million could suddenly become unreachable. But the truth was very simple. Money follows rules, and Harold had written those rules carefully. Eventually, Emily would realize there was only one person who could unlock the trust again. The same person she told to pack her bags and leave. And when that realization finally arrived, I suspected my daughter would be knocking on a door very soon. The only question was, which door she thought I would open. By early afternoon, the town park had grown quieter. The lunch crowd had returned to their offices, and the benches around the fountain sat mostly empty. A few leaves drifted down from the maple trees above me, spinning slowly before touching the ground. Autumn had always been Harold's favorite season. He liked the calm of it, the way things slowed down before winter. I sat there for nearly half an hour after finishing my call with Daniel Caldwell. Not doing much, just thinking, because sometimes the most important move is not moving at all. Eventually I stood up, brushed a few leaves from my coat, and began walking back toward the street. My plan for the day was simple. Find somewhere quiet to stay for a few nights. Give Emily time to figure things out. And let Harold's system do exactly what it was designed to do. The motel I stayed in the night before wasn't far from the park. 15 minutes by car. Clean enough. Quiet enough. I checked back into the same room shortly after 1 o'clock. Room 214. The same faded carpet. The same humming air conditioner in the window. I placed my purse on the small desk and sat down on the edge of the bed. For a moment, I allowed myself to rest. The last 24 hours had been long, but something inside me felt surprisingly calm. Because the hardest part had already happened. Leaving the house. Everything after that was simply consequences unfolding. I picked up the television remote and turned on the local news, letting the sound fill the quiet room. A weather report. Traffic updates. A story about a new grocery store opening on the north side of town. Normal things. At 1:37 p.m. my phone rang again. Emily. I let it ring for a few seconds before answering. Hello. Her voice arrived quickly this time. Mom, we need to talk. Not hello. Not how are you. Just urgency. I'm listening, I said. I just got off the phone with the bank again, she said. Her voice sounded tighter now. Controlled, but strained. They froze 3 accounts. 3. That meant the review had moved faster than even Daniel expected. Which accounts? I asked. The investment trust and 2 of the operating funds. I said nothing. Emily continued quickly. They said it's temporary, she added. Just a procedural hold. But she didn't sound convinced of her own words. What exactly did they tell you? I asked. They said the trust entered a compliance review because of a change in household conditions. The phrase sounded exactly like something Daniel would have written into the documents. Emily exhaled sharply. This is ridiculous, she said. It's just legal bureaucracy. Maybe, I replied. But she kept talking. I inherited the trust yesterday. Of course things are going to change. Her voice had that defensive tone again, like someone trying to argue with gravity. They asked if you were still living in the house, she continued. And what did you tell them? Emily hesitated. I told them you left. Another pause. They asked why. And I said you decided to move out. I leaned back against the headboard. That's not what happened, I said calmly. Emily sighed. Mom, please. Let's not do this. Her voice softened slightly. The bank made it sound like I violated something. You did. The words came out quietly. Not angry. Just factual. She went silent again. I could almost hear her mind replaying yesterday's conversation. Her standing in the living room. Her telling me to pack my things. Her closing the door behind me. Finally she spoke. The lawyer mentioned a clause, she said carefully. Yes. The family care clause. Yes. Another silence. Then Emily said something very different from anything she had said before. What does it actually mean? That question mattered. Because yesterday she believed she understood everything. Today she was asking. It means the trust expects you to take care of family, I said. I am taking care of family. Are you? The question landed gently. But she didn't answer. Outside my motel window a truck pulled into the parking lot. The engine shut off, leaving the afternoon quiet again. Emily spoke after several seconds. What do I need to do to fix this? She asked. The words came slower now, carefully chosen, because suddenly the inheritance wasn't just money. It was a problem, and problems need solutions. You should probably ask Daniel that, I said. I already did. And she hesitated again. Then she said the sentence that told me she finally understood. He said the trust requires you to have proper housing. I didn't respond. He also said, you have to confirm that. There it was. The real key to $33 million. Not a password. Not a bank code. Just one thing. My word. Emily's voice dropped slightly. Mom, where are you staying? I looked around the small motel room. The faded curtains. The humming air conditioner. The quiet afternoon light falling across the carpet. Somewhere simple, I said. That's not what I meant. I know. She hesitated again. Then her voice softened further. Maybe we should talk in person. The sentence hung between us. Yesterday, she had asked me to leave. Today she wanted me back. But not for the same reason. Not because she missed me. Because she needed something. And for the first time in her life, my daughter was beginning to understand what it felt like to need me. When Emily said we should talk in person, I didn't answer right away. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, holding the phone loosely in my hand. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the air conditioner. Outside, a car door slammed somewhere in the parking lot. Normal sounds. Normal afternoon. But the conversation on the phone was not normal. Yesterday, my daughter told me to pack my things. Today she wanted to meet. That kind of change It lasted nearly 10 seconds. When Emily spoke again, her voice sounded different. Quieter. Mom, yes. Where are you staying? She asked the question again. But this time it wasn't curiosity. It was calculation. Because she finally understood the situation. The trust required proof that I had proper housing. And right now, I didn't. Somewhere temporary, I said. That's not good enough, she replied quickly. For who? For the bank. I almost smiled. Now she was thinking like Harold. Rules. Conditions. Verification. What exactly did Daniel say? I asked. Emily hesitated. Then she answered. He said the surviving spouse must have reasonable housing. That's correct. And that housing has to be confirmed. Yes. Another pause. Then Emily said something I hadn't heard from her in a long time. Mom, you can come back. The words sounded awkward, like they didn't quite fit in her mouth. I waited. I mean it, she continued quickly. You can move back into the house. Not welcome back. Not please come home. Just move back. Like correcting a technical error. What changed? I asked. You know what changed? Yes, I said quietly. $33 million, she replied. The honesty surprised me. But sometimes pressure makes people speak more truthfully than they intend. Emily continued. If the bank sees you living there again, the review will probably stop. Probably. Not certainly. Just probably. And then the accounts reopen. That part mattered more to her. I see, I said. So, can you come back tonight? Tonight. The urgency in her voice was unmistakable now. Yesterday, she wanted me gone immediately. Today she wanted me back, just as fast. I stood up from the bed and walked to the window. Outside, the afternoon sun reflected off the parked cars in the motel lot. Life still moving. Consequences still unfolding. Emily, I said calmly. Yes. Yesterday you asked me to leave. I know. You were very clear. I know. And today you want me back. Yes. The word came quickly. Too quickly. Because she wasn't inviting her mother home. She was fixing a financial problem. I turned slightly toward the window. And why exactly do you want me back? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Then she said the quietest sentence of the entire conversation. Because the bank won't release the trust without you. And for the first time since the inheritance began, my daughter finally understood something important. The $33 million she thought she owned was still waiting for my decision. After Emily said the bank wouldn't release the trust without me, the phone went quiet again. This silence was different from the others. Before, she had paused because she was thinking. Now she paused because she knew the truth had finally been said out loud. $33 million. And the key to unlocking it was the woman she told to pack her bags. I stood by the motel window, watching the parking lot outside. A delivery truck pulled in slowly and stopped near the office. The driver stepped out and stretched his back before unloading a stack of cardboard boxes. Simple work. Simple problems. Not the kind of problems Emily was dealing with now. Mom, she said after a moment. Yes. We can fix this. Her voice carried urgency now. That same urgency people get when they realize the clock has started ticking. It depends on what you mean by fix, I replied. You moved back into the house, she said quickly. That's all the bank needs to see. Just like that. Yesterday the house had no room for me. Today it suddenly did. I didn't answer right away. Emily continued talking. I already called the bank manager again, she said. He said the review could close quickly if the housing issue is resolved. Housing issue, I repeated. Yes. Another pause. Mom, you don't need to stay at a motel. Her voice softened again, trying a different approach now. You can come home. Home. That word sounded almost unfamiliar coming from her. Because when someone throws you out of a place, it stops feeling like home very quickly. What room would I sleep in? I asked. She hesitated. Then she answered carefully. Your room. Yesterday you said the house was yours. It is. And yesterday you said I should leave. I know. Her voice tightened again. But things are different now. Yes, they were. But not for the reason she meant. Emily, I said calmly. Yes. Did you read the trust documents Daniel mentioned? Another long silence followed. I started, she admitted. And there's a lot of legal language. That didn't surprise me. People rarely read legal documents until something goes wrong. There's a section about the family care clause, she continued slowly. Yes. It says the beneficiary must provide reasonable housing and support to the surviving spouse. That's correct. And if that condition isn't met, she stopped speaking. The trust enters suspension. I finished. She exhaled slowly. Yeah. Another silence. Then she said something that sounded almost like disbelief. I didn't know Dad would do something like that. I thought about Harold, sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing those documents with his lawyer. He loved his family, I said. I know that. He also understood people. Emily didn't respond. I could almost picture her standing in the living room again, the same place where she crossed her arms and told me to pack my things. Now the house probably looked different to her. Not a prize. A problem. What happens if the trust stays frozen? She asked quietly. The assets stay locked, I replied. For how long? Until the violation is resolved. Another pause. And if it never gets resolved? I didn't answer right away, because the truth was obvious. Finally she spoke again. That would mean the money just sits there. Yes. And the house. The house is part of the trust. Her voice grew tighter. So technically I don't have access to it either. Not fully. I heard something shift in her breathing again. Frustration. Maybe fear. $33 million had looked like unlimited freedom yesterday. Now it looked like a locked door. Mom, she said slowly. Yes. Daniel said the surviving spouse has to confirm that the housing condition is satisfied. That's what the clause says. And you're the surviving spouse. Yes. Another silence. Then the most important question of the day arrived. Will you confirm it? I looked out the motel window again. The afternoon sun had moved lower now. Long shadows stretched across the parking lot. Emily waited. She didn't rush this time, because she finally understood that rushing wouldn't help. Everything depended on the answer. You told me to leave, I said quietly. I know. You closed the door behind me. I know. And now you want me back. Yes. Her voice almost sounded tired now. Not arrogant. Not confident. Just tired. I didn't understand the trust, she said softly. That's clear. But I do now. Maybe she did. Maybe she was just beginning to. Either way, something had changed. The inheritance wasn't power anymore. It was responsibility. Mom, she said again. Yes. If you come back to the house, the review will end. Probably. And the accounts will reopen. Yes. Another pause. Then she said it. Not confidently. Not proudly. But quietly. I need you to come home. And for the first time since everything began, my daughter finally said the one thing that mattered. Not that she owned the house. Not that the money was hers. But that she needed me. After Emily said she needed me to come home, the phone went quiet again. But this silence felt different. Before, the pauses between our words had been filled with tension, pride, and confusion. Now they were filled with something else. Reality. I stood by the motel window, watching the sunlight stretch across the parking lot. A man walked past carrying a suitcase toward one of the rooms. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed softly. Life continued around me. But on the other end of the phone, my daughter was waiting for an answer. Mom? She said after a moment. Yes. I mean it. Her voice sounded steadier now, but there was still something fragile underneath it. You can come back to the house. Back to the house. Not because she missed me. Not because she suddenly realized what she had done. But because the trust demanded it. Still, something in her tone had changed. Why? I asked quietly. She hesitated. Then she answered honestly. Because the bank won't release the trust without you. That was the practical reason. But it wasn't the only one. I could hear it in her voice. The way people sound when they realize they've made a mistake they can't easily undo. You know, I said calmly. Yesterday you told me the house wasn't mine anymore. I know. You said everything belonged to you now. I know. Her voice had grown quieter. Almost careful. And you were very sure about it, I added. Another pause. Yes. I leaned my shoulder against the window frame. Emily, I said. Yes. What made you so certain yesterday? She didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched for several seconds. Then she said something I hadn't expected. I thought that's how inheritance worked. The honesty in that sentence caught me slightly off guard. Meaning? I asked. I thought when Dad left everything to me, it meant I was in charge now. In charge of the money? Yes. In charge of the house? Yes. And in charge of me? She didn't answer right away. But the silence was enough. I didn't think about it that way, she finally said. But that's what happened. Yes. Another long pause. Then Emily spoke again. Her voice softer now. I shouldn't have said those things yesterday. That was the closest she had come to admitting it. You shouldn't have, I agreed. I was overwhelmed, she continued. $33 million is a lot of responsibility. I didn't argue with that. Money can feel like power, especially to someone who has never had it before. When the lawyer read the numbers, she said, everything started moving so fast. What do you mean? Calls from the bank, emails, financial advisors, real estate people. Her voice sounded distant now, like she was replaying the day in her mind. It felt like suddenly everyone expected me to make decisions. And you made one very quickly, I said. Yes. Another pause. Mom, she said quietly. Yes. I shouldn't have told you to leave. There it was. Not a perfect apology, but an important one. For a moment I didn't speak. Because apologies matter less than understanding. And understanding takes time. Finally, I asked the question that had been sitting quietly in the background all afternoon. If the trust hadn't frozen the accounts, I said, would you still want me to come back? Emily didn't answer immediately. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. Then she said something very carefully. I don't know. That answer didn't surprise me, because it was honest. But now you do want me back, I said. Yes. Why? Another pause. Then she gave the answer she probably should have started with. Because you're my mother. The words sounded unfamiliar to her, like something she hadn't thought about since yesterday. I see, I said. Outside my motel window, the afternoon sun was beginning to fade. Long shadows stretched across the parking lot. Mom, Emily said again. Yes. Will you come home? The question hung in the air between us. Yesterday, she asked me to leave. Today she was asking me to return. But the difference between those two moments wasn't the house. It wasn't the money. It was understanding. Because for the first time since the inheritance began, my daughter finally understood something her father always believed. Money doesn't decide who belongs in a family. People do. And now the only question left was whether I would open that door. Again, after Emily asked if I would come home, I didn't answer right away. The motel room was quiet. The late afternoon sun stretched across the carpet, and the hum of the air conditioner filled the silence between us. Some decisions shouldn't be rushed. Not when they carry years of history. Not when they involve family. Mom, Emily said softly. Yes. Are you still there? I'm here. She waited. For once, my daughter wasn't rushing me. That alone told me how much had changed in the last 24 hours. I'll come by this evening, I said finally. On the other end of the phone, I heard her exhale. A long breath she'd probably been holding since the bank called. Okay, she said quietly. Okay. The sun was already beginning to set when I drove back toward the house. The same road I had taken the day before. The same line of maple trees leading up the driveway. Yesterday, I left that house with nothing but my purse. Today, I returned with something very different. Perspective. I pulled into the driveway just after 6 o'clock. The house looked exactly the same. The same white siding Harold had insisted on repainting every 10 years. The same front porch where Emily used to sit and wait for the school bus when she was little. Nothing about the building had changed, but the atmosphere around it had. Emily was standing near the front door when I stepped out of the car. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically smaller, just less certain. The confidence she carried yesterday had disappeared. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The evening air was cool, and somewhere down the street a dog barked. Then Emily said the first words. Hi. Just that. Hi. No rehearsed speech. No dramatic explanation. Just a quiet greeting. Hi, Emily, I replied. She stepped forward slightly. I'm glad you came. I nodded. So am I. Another pause followed. Then she stepped aside and opened the front door. You can come in. I walked past her into the house. The living room looked almost identical to how I left it. Harold's chair still sat by the window. The photographs still lined the hallway. Nothing had been packed. Nothing had been moved. Emily closed the door behind me. I didn't touch anything, she said. Her voice sounded almost defensive. I wasn't sure what the bank would want to see. I looked around the room slowly. Then I sat down on the same sofa where we had argued the day before. Emily remained standing. That felt different too. Yesterday, she stood over me with her arms crossed. Today she stood there like a child waiting for permission to speak. Did you read the documents? I asked. Yes. And? She rubbed her hands together nervously. There are a lot of conditions. Yes. She nodded slowly. I didn't realize how much Dad thought about this. Harold had always thought several steps ahead, especially when it came to protecting people he loved. Emily looked around the room. I thought the inheritance meant everything was mine, she said quietly. But it doesn't really work that way. No, I said. It doesn't. Another silence followed. Then Emily said the words I had been waiting to hear. I'm sorry. The sentence was simple. Not perfect, but real. I shouldn't have told you to leave. I watched her carefully. Apologies are easy. Understanding is harder. What made you change your mind? I asked. She didn't hesitate this time. The trust. That answer was honest. But it wasn't the full story. She continued. And what Dad wrote. What about it? She looked toward Harold's chair by the window. The part about family. I followed her gaze. Harold spent countless mornings in that chair reading the newspaper. He loved quiet routines. And he loved knowing his family was safe. Emily spoke again. I think he knew this might happen. Yes, I said. I think he did. She walked slowly across the room and sat down in the chair opposite me. For a moment, she looked very young again. Like the girl who used to ask if she looked pretty enough for school pictures. The bank said the trust review could end if you confirm you're living here, she said. That's correct. And if that happens, the accounts reopen. Yes. She nodded. Then she said something unexpected. You don't have to do that. I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? You don't have to confirm anything, she said quietly. The money can stay frozen if you want. That sentence mattered more than the apology. Because for the first time, Emily wasn't talking about control. She was talking about consequences. I leaned back slightly on the sofa. Emily, I said. Yes. Your father didn't write that clause to punish you. I know. He wrote it to protect this family. She nodded slowly. I understand that now. The evening light faded through the living room windows. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I reached into my purse and took out my phone. Emily watched me carefully. Tomorrow morning, I said, I'll call Daniel. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. And I'll confirm that I'm living here. The trust review would end. The accounts would reopen. $33 million would move again. But that wasn't the most important thing that happened that evening. Because as Emily sat across from me in the quiet living room, she had finally learned the lesson Harold tried to teach without ever saying it out loud. Money can buy houses. It can build businesses. It can even create fortunes. But it can't replace the one thing that holds a family together. Respect. And in the end, that was the only thing I had ever asked my daughter to give me.